Welcome to the 2011 Summit Podcast, presented to you by the Oregon Ministry Network. Summit took place April 4th through 6th at People's Church in Salem. The following message was brought to us by Ming during the second plenary session.
Welcome back, Dr. Mel. And what a great first session we had on helping our churches. And I was just sharing with you, one of the things that I so enjoyed you talking about is sometimes when we hear this information, we think it's just for a big church. And it's not for a big church. No. It's for the smallest church to the biggest church. And but as we travel, one of the things that we're hearing a lot about is the need for spiritual formation in the church. Yeah. Some people call it discipleship, others spiritual formation. Right. What does that look to you in the churches that you are presently going around, and what are you hearing?
Well, I think that right now, honestly, it's one of our biggest needs in the church in America. And part of the problem is in our history, if you go back, for example, to the 50s, 60s, 70s, most churches used Sunday school as their delivery system for discipleship. And in fact, most churches actually had more in Sunday school than in worship in those days. And then Sunday school in many places kind of lost its effectiveness. And so in the 80s, a lot of churches moved to small groups. And that became, if you will, the delivery system for discipleship. But one of the problems is in many churches, small groups have become more relational than discipling. And so because it's no longer a program, I think we have trouble knowing how to talk about it. And like you say, some people, when they say discipleship, they'll say Sunday school. Some will say small group. Some will say Christian formation. Some will say discipleship. Some will say spiritual formation. But no term covers the whole thing. And like some people actually sitting in the audience think we're talking about 5 different things, not one thing. And one of our problems today is lack of clarity even in terms. That how do we help people know what, if we say a word, can they in their mind say, oh, that means, and it's the same thing as all these other terms. And I think many churches have made a mistake by not, in the truth, clarifying their vocabulary.
Absolutely. And if you have questions on what we're talking about right now, or even the first session this morning, you can text your questions to the number on the screen, 503-881-4074, and we will have those questions probably in the next couple of minutes here that we'll start answering some of your questions. But when you have traveled, then what are some great models that you see of discipleship today, or spiritual formation? Which one should we work?
Well, you know, every one of them, by the way, every term has some baggage. You just have, if I think Sunday school, to some people that seems old-fashioned. If I say the word discipleship, some people think it's discipline and negative. If I say spiritual formations, that could be Buddhism or Islam. I tend to use the word Christian formation because I can describe it both to insiders and outsiders, whereas discipleship is pretty well an insider word. The thing that's amazing today is there's not a one program delivery system, whereas there used to be. I mean, really, we used to say it's Sunday school or it's small group. So let me mention a couple of the models Joy's asked about that. One of the ones that's really popular right now are actually the sermon-based small groups. And, these were actually tried a lot in the 80s and later 90s, and they failed. But one of the reasons was they often were really a regurgitation of the sermon. Let's just talk about what pastor said, and usually it was talk about pastor. So that wasn't very effective. But, the ones today that are extremely effective, they take and build on the sermon. They don't actually summarize the sermon. They take the sermon and say, okay, what does this mean, in my home? What does this mean in my workplace? What else does God say about this? And probably the most famous example of this would be in North Coast Church in Vista with Larry Osborne. In fact, he's got the Evangelical Book of the Year, but he has a book called Sticky Church. And in that, he runs about 7,500. And they, this last year, averaged 94% of their adults in sermon-based small groups. Now think about that. So, that's a lot of people. And if you go to their church, by the way, when you get the bulletin, the actual small group is in it. And they've made it a really effective way. And because of that, people even who are traveling want to hear the sermon because you can't talk about it in the small group if you haven't. So they'll download the podcast or get a CD. That's one. Tomorrow you're going to have Wayne Cordero here. And he's got, to me, one of the other really great models out there. And that's based on helping the whole church read at the same time and journal together. And I think he's going to talk about SOAP and the pattern there. But, if probably Wayne's got now at Oahu, maybe 17,000, 18,000 that come there. And I would venture to say over 90% read and journal together. And the way they do it is, the sermon comes from what you read last week. Instead of the sermon being first and then, it actually comes from the section the congregation read last week. And I wanted you to see there's a trend. People are leveraging their sermon and their discipleship together. They're not separate programs. Another one that's actually having resurgence now that's really humorous to me is the class. Classes are coming back. We kind of went away from classes because we went to, for example, adult Bible fellowships and relational. But classes are coming back, and they're coming back in the most unusual places to me. For example, Willow Creek, that Seeker Church. This last year, they offer their classes at the church, and the enrollment is based on how many seats the room holds. They offered a course on Christology, the doctrine of Christ. 400 seats. It closed in 12 minutes.
Wow.
It went on the web at 10 o'clock. At 10:12, it was closed. They almost, in fact, if they offer any Bible book or any doctrine, it's closed. But at the other extreme would be like Rock Harbor Church in Costa Mesa, which would be one of the larger 20-something churches in America. They had run about 6,500. Same thing with them. In fact, they say we can't find big enough rooms if we offer either a book of the Bible or doctrine. There's a hunger right now for people of substance. They really don't want fluff. They really want substance. So, I think, classes, don't write them off. There's a place for them there. Then there's a whole series of ministries that use 2s, 3s, and foursomes. Probably Greg Ogden would be, or Todd Hunter. And by the way, there'll be a handout tonight available at the reception you can pick that shows where to go for all these websites and that type of thing if you're interested. But where you just get, 3 women together or 2 men together at work or something, but they are doing discipleship together. It's not really a home group, but it's more of a relational accountability group, but it's very discipleship focused as opposed to just purely relational. And 2 others that I would, kind of mention along that. There are now some incredible ones on the web because people are so busy now. But, there's free ones like YouChurch. There's a couple of more sophisticated ones where you actually go on and take a spiritual test, find out what you know, where you are, and then it designs a curriculum for you, and then it holds you accountable. It'll send you an email, hey, you didn't have devotions today. Come on, get with it. And then the last one I would mention, there are some wonderful models of one-on-one coaching. And this has not been part of our tradition, but it has been part of spirituality for the last 400, somewhat, spiritual direction, coaching, something like that. There are some excellent programs like the Alongside from the Navigators. I know that Ministry International has one, but that can help you design some one-on-one. And I think the thing I'm seeing now is there is no longer one program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the fact that resourcing you as our pastors and leaders to recognize there's many avenues for you to be able to incorporate these into your churches. And we want to be able to resource you with that information. So, like we said, tonight there will be a handout. If you're not here tonight, we'll make sure it gets up on the web that you can get these resources as well. And along with that, to let you know that if you have questions on what we're talking about, again, you can put it up on the screen, but, you might get something and say, well, this is great information, but I'm not really sure how to, put this in, implement it into our church. Feel free to call us. We're here to serve you. And we really want to come alongside you and really help you disciple in your churches. Come alongside those who are wanting to grow and wanting to really come alongside you to help you do the work of the ministry. But what we're really talking about, and what you talked about this morning, is that this is kind of like the second base. They've come into the church, but now we have to train them to help them do the work of the ministry that we are really wanting them to do.
And I think they have to see that it's a lifelong process, not a program.
Right.
That it's not like, I'm going to take this 12 weeks and now I am discipled. I think they have to see that this is a journey. And they ought to be able to look at their life and say, this is how I'm more like Christ today than I was a year ago. And a year from now, I ought to be more like him, or something's wrong. And so they ought to be able to look at their own life and see the attitudes and behaviors of Christ more reflected.
And along with that, maybe you're in a community where there's no Assembly of God church maybe close to you. What I would encourage you to do is join up with a pastor from one of the other churches and hold each other accountable to some of these things in your lives. What a great way to come alongside. And, we're all about the same Jesus that we're serving. We're all trying to get people into the same relationship with the Lord. And how wonderful would that be to join with other pastors in your area and hold each other accountability to your devotional life. And I would just share with you one of the things in coaching that we have found, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody that I'm looking out at, but one of the things that we have found that many pastors are doing the work of the ministry, but they are not replenishing themselves spiritually. And that is one of the things that we really want to encourage you in, is that, your devotional life is very important if you are going to be giving out on Sundays. And that is part of discipleship for yourself. That's part of spiritual formation for yourself. And if that is something that you struggle with, find somebody here to hold you accountable while you're here, and talk about it. Be honest, be transparent, because that's what we want everybody to know, that they can be that. We don't need to come in with a facade that says we've got it all together, our lives are great, we're doing fabulous. The bottom line is all of us struggle in something. But how wonderful to know that somebody would come alongside you and say, hey, I'm in the game with you. I'm here to journey with you. And let's hold each other accountable in everything that we do and everything that we say. Do we have any questions that we have come? Nursery help is often a need in a small church. Common reply when asked if they'll help is, it's not my gifting or passion.
Well, I think that it's a good question because it's a real question, and I think that makes it a great question. Couple of things I would say on that. First off, everybody who's a servant of God is going to have to do some things that aren't what they prefer. I think that's why it says, take up our cross daily. Less of me, more of him. If it was just about what I wanted, this would be pretty self-seeking. So there's times that every one of us has to do things that we don't feel comfortable with. I do think as a church, as quickly as possible, we need to... I do believe, by the way, that there are people that God did wire for that. We may not have discovered. As quickly as possible, help people, if you will, get on the right seat on the bus. But there is a time we all have to do things that aren't, if you will, our preference. If you do it too long, it tends to burn you out. But for a season, it's just called service. That's why we're servant leaders. So, I think it's a real issue. Like I think it would be a tragedy, by the way, to leave that person there too long because their attitude will be caught by the children. And that's not the attitude we want at church. We want them to think that they're loved and God loves them and the people that are working with them love them. Yeah.
And I think for those people, when you are putting them into service places, is to make sure that your people are affirming and thanking. Sometimes that is a thankless job.
Yeah.
And I think the more that those people are affirmed, the more appreciated they feel and the more apt they are to stay helping you. Another question? What is the best response to volunteers who don't follow through with responsibilities?
Well, and this comes back to why, and this kind of relates really to the last session, but this is why I think you have to have ongoing coaching. Some people are great dreamers. They can come up with 100 ideas, but they can't get 2 books in a row, alphabetically. The fact is, we don't all have to be compulsive, but somebody's got to help them at least get the basic job. And I think that's coaching. I don't think it's by humiliation. I don't think it's by telling them how bad they are. I don't think it's by, saying, well, they're not committed to Christ. Some of it's personality. Some of it's just their heritage. But that's why I think they have to have a ministry team and a team leader who kind of says, you could really do better for God. You just need to step up a little bit. Yeah.
Very good. Another question? Talk about new believers' discipleship formation systems.
An interesting thing on that one is we have changed the paradigm when we're dealing with non-Christians. It used to be the paradigm was we tried to present the gospel to them. They came to Christ in a conversion experience, and then we put them in a new convert or discipleship program. And that was kind of the sequence. On people today who don't have a Christian background, generally speaking, you build relationship with them, you disciple them, and then they come to Christ. But the discipleship almost always happens pre-conversion. Because until they get discipled, they don't know if they believe it. And that's why, by the way, statistically, the most effective evangelism program in the world right now is Alpha, which is a doctrine course for non-Christians. And I wish a lot of Assembly of God people had their doctrine as well as that. And it's thoroughly Pentecostal too, by the way. But you have to understand, if you have somebody who has no background in church, they don't know anything about it, they're still trying to figure out, do they even believe there is a God? Is Jesus really the only way? Is sin real? Is there a heaven? Those are doctrine questions. And they need to answer those before they ever say, I'm on board. So that's one thing that we have to rethink, because we used to offer the new convert course after salvation. We may need to offer it before.
In doing that, then how would you present that? How would you help people know that was a class for them?
I think that there's a couple of ways. One is, I think people say, you may not accept Christ or Christianity, but wouldn't you like to know really what it stands for? Before you just outright reject it, wouldn't you like at least to find out what it is? And it's okay to have questions. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to not buy it. But let's talk about it. And then I think in the course of that, there comes a point, if you've come to the place that you really believe that Jesus Christ is the answer, what's keeping you back? I think that the conversion becomes, if you will, a natural part of the discussion there.
In the Alpha course, and I'll just use that for an example, is that a lot of classes? Is that a lot of their time?
Oh, good, yeah. The Alpha one, by the way, can be done by any size church. I know a church on an Indian reservation with 30 people that runs Alpha every year. And they average 7 conversions a year through that. Alpha is really about a 10-week course that involves a meal, and you watch a video, and then you talk about it. And one of the hardest things is to get Christians to shut up. Because, one of the things is going to be that Jesus is God's son. Well, obviously, you got an atheist sitting there saying, I don't buy that. So some Christian is ready now to, pull out, their P.C. Nelson and give them, the Christology doctrine. And what you have to say, well, that's interesting. What do you think? You've got to allow the Word of God to speak for itself. It doesn't need you. And that's where you have to get Christians to kind of, if you will, back up. But in that, we find in our churches that 90% of the participants will have made a decision for Jesus Christ by the 10th week. 9 out of 10. We have one church, by the way, in Bellevue that averages 280 conversions a year through Alpha alone. Now, it's a big church, but I'm saying you can do this in any size church because, again, the pastor I mentioned on any reservation does it in his home. But you have a meal because it builds this relational trust. And then you watch a video, and the guy's got this great, British accent, which people are fascinated.
That makes it good in itself.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that I'd get a rise out of joy there. But then you just talk about it, and here's what happened. In fact, most people come to Christ by the 6th week. Now, I can tell you, they could sit in your sermon 6 weeks, and a lot of them not come to Christ. But see, what are they doing? Is God real? Is sin real? Is Jesus Christ the answer? I mean, they're dealing with theological things. In fact, I encourage a lot of the churches, and I don't mean to go off on, I'm not doing a sales pitch for it, but I believe in it, to do it first with your believers, like in their midweek, where they know what they believe. And then tell them they got to quit talking and do it with unbelievers.
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned more recently is that oftentimes we think we know the answers, so we're very quick to tell people, and recognizing that asking the questions to help the non-believer discover the answers has been so much more meaningful, because when we're telling them, it's like we have the only answer and it's our way. But when we're asking questions and, well, help me understand why you believe that. Well, what would cause? And think of some questions that you are going to draw out of that non-believer, why they've come to their value system, why they've come to the decisions that they've come to before you ever tell them what you think. Because most of the time you will find that through the discovery, they will come to recognize that they need something more.
Yeah, and in fact, by the way, another program like Alpha that's like that is called Q Place. If the letter Q for Question Place. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I like about these, the person leading it doesn't have to be a teacher.
Right.
See, it's not like somebody that's got to get up and present it, because you're not. All you're doing is asking questions and listening, which you're really facilitating, and a lot more people are comfortable doing that than if you would giving the presentation. So I think both of those are excellent for that. Yeah.
Great. Any more questions up there? Talk about biblical meditation as opposed to Bible reading and other forms of discipleship.
Well, the interesting thing on many of the spiritual disciplines, you can do all of the spiritual disciplines and not become Christ-like. But I know of almost no one who's Christ-like who doesn't do the spiritual disciplines. It's one of the, legalistically doing them and checking them off doesn't make you spiritual. The whole point of meditation, by the way, and here is a great point, I think, of what separates Christian meditation from, if you will, some of the Asian religions in meditation. In the Asian, it's clearing your mind of everything. In Christian, it's rethinking the words of God. Because it comes from the word rumination, which means to chew again, which means you've already said it. So, in Christian, it's not, I'm trying to get my mind empty. In Christian meditation, it's, what is God saying through His Word, and I'm reflecting on it. I think that one of the things in our society is, one, we've become instant everything. We want quick food, quick this, quick loans, quick you name it. Also, our travel is fast. We don't walk everywhere. We don't plow the field with the horse. Which in olden times, they had more time to just naturally meditate. Mm-hmm. We almost have to intentionally stop. And I would say that reason a lot of people don't have gifts of discernment and hear words of knowledge is they never have time to hear God speak. They're either talking or busy. They don't ever wait, if you will. And, in Pentecost, some of you that are my age remember, we used to use words like tarrying and waiting at the altar. Well, the truth was, what we were saying is, God, I'm here, I'm yours, I'm for you, I'm listening. And that's really what meditation is. But it doesn't have to be at an altar. It can be at home by my bed. It could be in my office. I think, honestly, we have an absence of meditation. I think we are not taking time to think the thoughts of God.
So when you talk to pastors, they tell you they're too busy to do anything like this. So how would you help them know how to put this into their week even?
Well, I think that there's a great point. Honestly, many of us are good professional students. Like, we can prepare to preach, but we don't have a good spiritual life. And they're two different things. They really are. But our credibility in our community is only going to be by who we are, not what we say on Sunday. If we are not close to God, if this isn't really something we love, if I'm not just reading it when I'm studying for a sermon, people are going to think it's pretty inauthentic on our part. I think that what that tells us is we've been shaped into the world, as Romans 12:1 says. We've let the world press it into. We think we're so busy doing the work of God, we don't have time to be the people of God. Something wrong. We've got to, first off, be the people of God, and then the message comes out of that life. And so I think we have to learn, if you will, some spiritual discipline. We've got to learn practices that allow us to be in God's presence, to hear his voice, to read his word, to talk and commune with him in a relationship, not just intellectually.
So how would you encourage them to do that? What would you tell somebody's next step?
Well, personally, I think that they need, now, I'm not trying to legislate it legalistically, but I think they need to separate their devotions from their sermon preparation. Because I think that it's so easy to turn our devotions into our sermon prep, just like a lecturer prepares for a lecture. So I think it's separate. I think they have to ask, what is their rhythm of the day? Because, some people are morning people. And by the way, that's why he called it morning, because he didn't mean anybody to be that way. No, I'm sorry. But sorry, I couldn't resist that. If I remember as a young person, I tried to have devotions in the morning, and what I did was got a lot of extra sleep. Because I just don't wake up. Now, you get me 10 o'clock at night, and I'm fired up and ready to go. I work the swing shift mentally. So I do my devotions in the evening. But I think you have to find your rhythm. That you have to find how God's wired you so that you, and most people, by the way, I think they're better to do it first or last. Because then they sleep on it and meditate on it, or then they have it in focus for the day. But I think they have to just put it into their discipline. Yeah.
So what would you say is the next step for you as a person when it comes, we're talking about these things. We've talked about several things today, but what are some next steps that you're taking from this? Because again, we don't want this just to be information. We want to change it to, so there will be, good, you'll have those 3 words down, won't you? Okay, do we have another question? How often should ministries conduct self-assessments? How do you make them a regular part of each ministry?
Yeah, I think any organization, whether it be a ministry, a church, a business, whatever, needs to have what I'd call a formal assessment at least once a year. In fact, that's the advantage, if you will, of zero-based thinking. That is it still legitimate? Is it still, is it doing what we think it's doing? So I think that I would say in discipleship as a believer, I think you need to do once a month. I think if you can't honestly say, how am I more like Jesus Christ now than I was a month ago? What's wrong? So I think that as part of your devotional life, you need to have a rhythm where you're assessing it. I do also believe, and you mentioned it earlier on coaching and all, I think there's real value in having some accountability partners. I mean, say what you are, we're fallen people. And if I know somebody's going to ask me, sometimes I live better than if they don't. And I think that there is something to be said for having 2 or 3 people in your life that not only have permission but are encouraged to ask, how are things going with God? What's it like? What are you doing right now? What's God saying to you? On a regular basis. But at least monthly, I would think you need to do self-evaluation. Because you could have a couple of weeks that are terrible, but at the end of a month, we ought to find some normalcy there.
Very good. Another question? Please talk about the fivefold ministries of the church and how they're a part of spiritual formation.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that are interesting about that. First off, and we're talking the Ephesians 4:11 passage there. We do need all of those. Now, one of the problems we have in Pentecost, by the way, is we don't have clarity of definition, for example, on apostle and prophet or evangelist anymore. I mean, honestly, if you were to take all of our Pentecostal theologians and ask them to define those words, they're not going to come down the same, candidly. So that causes a little bit of a problem. The other thing that I think that causes a problem is we think that like it's 2020, 2020, 20. But think in the Old Testament, how many prophets were they to the people of God? What was the ratio? Even in the early church, I mean, if there were 12 apostles, there were 3,000 saved day one, and then the churches begin to multiply. I mean, it's not like you're going to have all 5 in every local church. I don't think that was ever presented as a model. But the body of Christ needs people that are speaking to us, if you will, in a clarity way. It needs people that are calling people to lifestyle. The most prevalent one would be pastor-teacher, because we would find all of it, especially through the Pauline literature, that there. So I think we need all of them. I think there is a little bit of an overstatement thinking that all 5 are resident in every church. I don't think that was normative at any point in biblical scripture.
Okay, next question. Anybody have one they want to text up there? What do you think of the simple church concept?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. In fact, even in the little video we watched just before this, Time magazine says that there are 30 million adults in America that they call the de-churched. They're people who still love God but don't like the church. Almost always when you talk to them, you find they've been hurt. Usually some kind of politics, something like that. Something went on, and they basically now are absentee from the body of Christ, but they still consider themselves Christian in their own mind. The simple church has been incredibly effective at reaching those people, because it doesn't have, if you will, a lot of structure to it. They're usually quite simple. They usually sing and preach and have some kind of discipleship. There's not a lot of committees. There's not a lot of elections. It's pretty simple stuff. And it's had great impact on especially the de-churched. It also has had impact on people who, and this would be true generationally, who see the church institutionally, not spiritually. It doesn't feel like such a business. And that actually is an attracting point. So I think the simple church is wonderful. And in many ways, the simple church is probably more like an Acts church than a church from the 1800s.
Great. Talk about the biblical relationship between church and parachurch ministries.
Yeah. Okay, in the doctrine of the church, ecclesiology, one of the things that designates a church has to do with a body, a function, a group, who are performing the purposes or functions of a church. By definition, a parachurch focuses on only one of the aspects. Now, generally, the reason parachurches have developed is that there was a neglect of one of the purposes and they are filling a need. So, the two are not incompatible at all. In fact, they can have a wonderful relationship. But you have to be careful that the parachurch doesn't replace the church, because it doesn't have the full orb, as you would find in a New Testament church, of either function, systems, or purposes. But I think they can work together very well if you understand the relationship of it. It's not the church, but it is helping the church do at least one of its functions. I see no conflict at all that way.
Any other questions? Assuming 20% are running on fumes, yes, what action steps should I take for them tomorrow?
And I think, unfortunately, this is more common than the exception. But I will come back until you have great conviction that really God wants to use people. You'll tend to want to use them to do your ministry. And that'll come back to burn you. I think you got to really get clear that they have a ministry and that you want to help them. And so I think you need to get your conviction right before you do that. And then I would think, like on the simple design, what's a step you could take? Like, again, this is probably easier in a small church because honestly it can be having somebody to your home and talking about, hey, how's God helping you? Here's some tools we could use. Why don't we get together Saturday morning? Let me just kind of help you. I mean, it can be very related. It doesn't have to be a big kind of deal. But I would ask you, the people that aren't ministering, why aren't they? And most of the time it's because they have no idea what they could do. I mean, honestly, that's the most common thing. They don't know. I don't sing, I don't preach, I don't care for kids. Must not mean me. Okay, you see what I'm saying? They haven't even realized that, man, God may want to use them in some mighty way that we haven't even dreamed of. Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things that I found when, as a pastor's wife, is when going out with my friends, or even some people that I was just meeting for the first time, was asking them, just like you said earlier, was, you know, what are you most passionate about? Mm-hmm. What do you love to do?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that would lead very much so to where I could foresee them. Yeah. And sometimes I think one-on-one, when you're doing the one-on-one, you're going to build into that person before that person will give to you. And so you might spend several times one-on-one with somebody before you have earned the right to say, would you consider? Do you see this as a part of your gifting? How would you see yourself serving for 3 months? And again, like you said earlier today, I think many times people think if we're going to ask them to do something, it's forever. And one of the keys I feel is that if you, like you said, if you give them an end date, they know that it's not forever. And I'm going back to some of the things that I learned from doing this was by giving them an end date. Many times they never left the team.
Oh, no.
Because they loved what they were doing, and we had them in their passion. And that's the key. What are they passionate about? And then to consider, all the time, affirming them where they are. You can't put somebody in a position, leave them there, and think, great, I've got that taken care of, now let's go to the next thing. Because that person still needs your affirmation. They need to know that they are still a part of your team, and that you are still there to resource them, and that that you care about that person, that you just didn't fill a slot. And that's the key. Don't just fill something. Recognize they have that passion, and that you're letting them move in their giftings. And I think it's important for us to even use the verbiage that is the spiritual terms that they are, so they understand that this is a spiritual gift that we read about in the Word, and we're wanting them to walk in that spiritual gift. And there's something about, I always, more recently, I should say, is I heard that people don't like to be called volunteers as much as they like to be called leaders. So if you're wanting them to be a part of your nursery and you're having a difficult time getting people in your nursery, tell them that you need them to come on board for 3 months as a team leader for your 3-year-olds. Now, most people will respond to a 3-month commitment to help any area. And then from that, then how do you help them? And if it's something that you see that they're doing so well, is to be able to, again, encourage them and disciple them and come alongside them. So sometimes you see things in them that they don't see in themselves.
And I think right along with that, a lot of times people don't see the actual impact of what they do. So, for example, somebody in the nursery, if they think they're just babysitting, that's not very rewarding in a way. But if they realize they're doing multiple things, first off, They're creating the entire impression of what Jesus Christ is like to children.
That's right.
Secondly, they have parents, if their parents trust them, who will actually hear the Word of God and respond. If they're worried about their kids, they may be in the service, but they're not paying attention. So anything that happens in a service, they actually had a part of.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times they haven't seen the bigger picture that comes to that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ming and Mel. You know, you got to give him the right of his doctorate. Well, you have done so much research. You have learned so much, and we just get to glean from a couple hours of the incredible insight that you have. And I just want you to know that you are an incredible blessing to us as a network. And we're so thankful that you would come.
I just count it a joy. Count it a joy. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you for listening to the 2011 Summit Podcast. For more information on the Oregon Ministry Network and our events, please visit our website at oregonag.org.